16th. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting for the City of Lacombe Council. It is Monday, December 5th, and it is 5:30 p.m. I will call the meeting to order. Has everyone had an opportunity to review minutes? Specifically not minutes, agenda, specifically the consent agenda. Are there items you'd like to see removed from there? If there are not, we still need a motion. Councillor Dallas.
Motion to accept the consent agenda.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? All those in favor? Oh, I don't like doing that for consent agenda. It takes too long. And the next item up is for adoption of agenda. That was a question as much as it was a statement to our IT department. So if we would have a motion in that regard, please. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I will move that we accept the agenda as presented.
Thank you. Councillor Connick, anything else? Very good. Please vote. Thank you. That's unanimous. And no forum items today, so down to presentations. We're happy to have here with us our Chief Cole. Thank you for joining us. Item 4.1, the Lacombe Emergency Management Advisory Update. And just a reminder to use the microphone, please, for the benefit of everybody in the gallery and at home. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here on behalf of the Lacombe Emergency Management to present a report to Council outlining some achievements in emergency management in 2022 for the City of Lacombe. In 2020, we saw the development of the COVID-19 pandemic hit the world, and Lacombe was no different. While working to monitor and administer all the changes, this group worked effortlessly as the pandemic progressed worldwide. The City of Lacombe's emergency management team worked together to ensure the safety of the citizens was and remained, and still remains, a top priority. We've now come to a point where we must shift our focus and get back to being prepared to aid and care for the citizens of our community in the event of an emergency. In cooperation with the Lacombe Regional Emergency Management Partnership, the city assisted in developing some significant improvements to the overall incident command system. An essential portion of the emergency management system involves emergency social services. A vital part of any emergency is to look after the displaced residents in a time of need. In the past, emergency social services has always run a separate incident command system. This year, with the cooperation of some other agencies such as Lacombe Regional Emergency Management Partnership, Alberta Emergency Management Association, and other provincial and local agencies, came the incorporation of the ESS into the overall incident command system. This would assist in streamlining requests for services and assistance and provide support behind the scenes so that running of a reception center flows seamlessly. Provincial regulations dictate with each municipality we must complete an exercise of an emergency plan yearly, with a full-scale exercise occurring every 4 years. In 2020 and 2021, throughout the COVID pandemic, all municipalities that activate an emergency operations center were granted credit for this requirement. Keeping in alignment with provincial regulations, in September of 2022, the City of Lacombe conducted a tabletop exercise with its emergency social services team. This training/exercise day was held with over 30 staff and outside partners participating. The day was a massive success as they completed a run-through of setting up and operating a reception center. With our tabletop exercise completed, it was now on to planning for a full-scale exercise that would involve the entire region. With LREMP taking the lead on this venture, it was time to test our newly revised incident command system that incorporated ESS into the bigger picture. October 26th was deemed as game day. With a significant winter storm rolling through the entire region, several communities simulate power outages and loss of critical infrastructure, which ended up resulting in evacuation of their communities. The city of Lacombe and the town of Black Falls were requested to activate reception centers to care for the evacuees coming. In total that day, there were 485 participants, ranging from municipal staff, students and teachers of Wolf Creek schools, provincial government representative, and other agencies throughout the Lacombe region. This exercise was a significant success. Objectives that were set out by the planning team were remarkably achieved. As you can see here, one great success is the registering and processing of 48 evacuees in as little as 45 minutes. With the assistance of the incident management team, which was located at the incident command post, the amalgamation of emergency social services into the overall ICS proved to be a significant improvement. Some learnings that came out of the exercise is that there will continue to be training provided for staff overall, with a focus on several positions to receive role-specific training. Another tabletop exercise will be planned for early 2023 to capture the learnings and to maintain the momentum from October. Layout plans have already been discussed with staff at the LMC to ensure readiness if called upon if needed. With 2022 almost in the books, there are plans to celebrate this significant accomplishment in the new year with everyone involved. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Chief Cole. We appreciate the work you do as our fire chief and also our Director of Emergency Management. Does anyone have any questions at this time for Chief Cole? Makes that
Perfect.
Q&A period pretty easy, doesn't it?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So the next item up is a presentation from Michael Doherty from M. Doherty Consulting on what we heard with regard to the Heritage Survey and Inventory Update, and he is joining us electronically. Michael, can you hear us? I think that maybe you have your microphone muted on your end.
Now we're unmuted.
That sounds much better.
Good.
Thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Happy to be here. I don't see the slide deck. I do have it up on another monitor here, so I can direct who's ever going through it there, and we'll just try to coordinate the two. But all I see is mayor and council on my screen. So, but we'll get through this without, I don't think, too much issue. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Really excited to be here to talk about Heritage Management, the Survey and Inventory Update. It's a 2-scope project, Scope 1 and Scope 2. I'm on to slide 2. Does everybody see sense of place in heritage preservation?
Mr. Doherty, I'm just going to interrupt you there. I think perhaps there may have been some confusion with the technology end of things, and I think that perhaps there is a way for you to take control of what comes up on our screen here as well. So I would have our CAO just enlighten you as to how to go about that.
I think I have it. Can you see?
There we go. That's better.
Awesome. So I will take control. So I'll go back to slide 1 just so you can see the neat image, and I'll do my welcome again, and really happy to be here. really thankful for this opportunity to talk to you tonight. I've been asked to keep my talking down to 10 minutes, but I tend to geek out on this stuff. So if I go over, my apologies about that. Lacombe has a real deep history in heritage. It's a gem of a community. Actually, the very first survey work was done in 1972, which is interesting to think about, that there was heritage survey work being done in a period that we now deem as heritage. So 50 years ago, anything being built, we deem as a heritage structure. So heritage management in Lacombe actually predates heritage itself, which is it's an interesting thing to think about. The photo you see was 2015, 2016, and it is a collective of heritage professionals across Alberta who came to Lacombe to have a forum to learn a little bit about what Lacombe was doing to network and communicate with one another. It was my first opportunity being in Lacombe and learning the great things that were going on. So really grew some excitement about working with Lacombe in the future. What are we talking about today? We're talking about updating the survey, places of interest, and heritage inventory. I know you all know well heritage management as recent designations and MHRs have been going through. Just to put it in the broader perspective, the heritage survey is the larger catchment. So these are our pre-1950 structures. It's a collection of what we know about pre-1950 structures. The places of interest is refining that down to, are these significant? Are they interesting? What are these sites? The heritage inventory are the ones we know have deep interest or deep significance and are important to the community. And of course, the register is the listing of protected resources within the municipality. Our current project has two scopes. Scope 1 is to look at the 2009-2010 survey and update that information. At the same time, update the places of interest list, which sat at 109 sites. So look at what remains, look at what we might need to add to that, and then look at that 50-year scope. So what post-World War II era sites might we want to survey, and then look at how we engage and reinvigorate our community in heritage awareness. Scope 2 takes it to the next step and it develops out that inventory. So we're looking at inventorying up to 15 more sites. So adding statements of significance and evaluating 15 more sites, and also looking at incentives. So what incentives HRC has, what incentives the province has, what incentives there might be available to our property owners. Community engagement is extremely important in heritage management. In fact, it's fundamental. 30 years ago, it really wasn't. It wasn't looked at as an important piece. It was thought that heritage experts come in and tell a community, this is what's important and this is how you should protect it. That really flipped about a quarter century ago, and it said, you know, the community should really decide where heritage value is, what are the themes, and what is significant. So we go out to the community and we find out which sites should be surveyed, which sites are of interest to the community, which sites should we evaluate for inventory, and then how would you like as a community to engage with heritage? And that was really the focus of our community engagement tactics, what we went out to learn from the community. Our engagement ran from August through October, and it was conducted in 3 events and an online survey. The 3 events was the Hammer-In Festival in August, Active Living Fair in September, the Farmers Market in October, and the online survey garnered 73 responses. In total, there were 157 direct engagements there. Also, while I've been out on the streets in late October, November, taking photographs and field notes, I had a few folks come up to me and say, hey, what are you doing? What are you taking pictures of this house about? And so I was able to engage directly with the community that way. We also did a bit of a social media push and traditional media push. What we heard is kind of what we expected, certainly about what places matter most. We know that the community really reveres certain eras of history. Certain resources are really important to the community. Number one resource mentioned time and time again is the Flatiron business. This is an internationally renowned building. We all know that. One that spoke very loud and clear was the downtown proper. So not any specific resource, but the downtown as an area, that this was really grounding, really important to the community, really signified what Lacombe was. We heard about the Michener House, the Cenotaph, blacksmith shop, livestock pavilion. We did want to focus in on that post-World War II era. It is sometimes a difficult conversation convincing people that things in our lifespan, 60s and 70s, could be heritage. So people really like to default to the pre-World War II era, but getting into that post is an important conversation. The LMC was mentioned. We know this is a modern structure, so not really within our scope, but there were some other interesting resources brought up by the community, from the provincial building to the airport to City Hall. And I believe they were referencing the former City Hall that sat around where the LMC grounds are, the IDA building, a funeral home that sits on the C&E Trail. And then in general, there was a good appreciation for the mid-century modern idea of architecture. So the thing that deviated from the standard 1950s and 60s bungalows. So we're looking at influences by the international style or modern style of flat roof housing, that piece. So there was a real keen interest in that. Emerging places, so specific places of interest that we think are really emerging in the community. There is a real deep appreciation for 50th Avenue, and this is specifically the residential gateway to downtown. So what everybody experiences as they drive into the community. So where we start residential to downtown. One person, really an eloquent response in the survey, said that it's a welcoming and it's a place that lets you know that heritage is important. The provincial building was referenced. There was a real focus on outdoor spaces, which was interesting. And when I would try to push towards a built resource, people would push me back outside and they'd say, but these outside places are really important to us. So they were speaking specifically of the grounds around the LMC. There was mention of ballparks and playgrounds and these places that were really formative to them. The college in general, so not any specific resource, but in generality, the area around the college was spoken of, deep reverence for that. And then one interesting emerging one, and tells a really interesting story, is the Thompson Palliser Bait Company, which was formerly the Alaskan Camper showroom, which we know as the M&M meat store. So, and it really fits within that mid-century modern aesthetic. It's got the low gable. It looks like a 1960s structure, but it's got this really wonderful story about it and the life and adaptive reuse that it has played over time. The important heritage themes that we heard from the community, we kind of knew this going in, but it was good to hear it again. There is a deep appreciation for the pre-World War II era development. So that's the Edwardian downtown development. That's the heritage, the two-story heritage houses that we're all used to seeing as heritage houses. There is interest in the mid-century modern aesthetic. I mentioned that previously. This one's interesting to me because as an outsider coming in, I get lost in the art and the architecture. So I look at building and form and mass. I look at design lines. I look at architectural features. But the community itself doesn't so much look at that, but looks at how it's connected to them. So what is the story that relates to me? So I heard about going to the Lux Theater in the 1960s and watching movies. I heard about going to Uglies and eating the garlic fries and enjoying that, and going to the different cafes and locations, and a lot about the schools. So it's really interesting how people connect stories to historic places. Again, a big push towards the outside. What sort of outside places as cultural resources can we look at? Cultural landscapes can we look at for heritage? And then there is a real deep appreciation for this feeling. And it's hard to embody what a feeling is, but this feeling that gets evoked when you're downtown or when you're on 50th. It's a feeling that makes you feel grounded and makes you feel like you're in Lacombe and that Lacombe means something. We also wanted to explore how community likes to engage, what sort of engagement tactics we can do around heritage. Of course, events comes in number one, very high at 63%. Museums, This next piece is interesting. Online, people want to engage with heritage online, and that is really intriguing, and I think really opens up potential for HRC or the Historical Society or others to connect with people online through heritage resources. I want to draw your attention to the audience, because this one is, and we talked about it at an HRC meeting this morning, this one is a curiosity. So going in to heritage work, I typically know what my audience is, and my audience is 60 years and older, and that's the audience that I know I'm going to work with, and that's what I expected, and that's who hit number one as our audience. Now, this curiosity are number 2s and 3s, because you don't see this, or I've not seen this elsewhere in work that I've done. So we have this emerging class of 20 to 30 to 40-year-olds that are keenly interested in heritage and engaging on heritage. I'm not sure what's driving that. I don't know what that is. I think it's fantastic. I love it. I love that we have this demographic coming up who cherishes history and heritage. Now, the interesting piece is, how do we begin to connect these? So how do we get engaged with that audience? What are the connection points? Is it that online? Is that how we connect with that upcoming audience? So we're beginning to look at what those different tools are for engaging, and that's a part of the current report that we're working on, which is the Scope 1 final report. So Scope 1, in our next step, we're wrapping that up this week. I'm writing my report on the update to the survey. I'm writing my report to the update for the POIL, and how my recommendations on how we can engage with the community. This report will also, the What We Heard report will also help us understand the Scope 2 development, in particular, how we can build out the heritage inventory. We had a really great HRC meeting this morning to discuss how we begin to develop the heritage inventory and begin to adopt Scope 2. On December 15th, I'll be presenting this report, a bit of Scope 1 report, and a bit of Lacomb's historic information on heritage management in a presentation via the Historical Society. Excited to present that. And then in mid to late January, we'll have a follow-up presentation on good stewardship. So stewardship of heritage properties, what sort of grants are available, how community and property owners can steward their historic resources themselves. I talked very fast and gave a whirlwind. I hope I was in under the 10 minutes, but I don't have anywhere to go, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, and really excited to talk heritage. We can talk about the report that you have, which is the detailed What We Heard report, or if there's any particular point of either Scope 1 or Scope 2 that you wish to discuss, I'm happy to try to answer your questions the best I can.
Thank you very much for that information. I was just curious, with respect to the audience numbers, was there a pretty significant amount of people that weren't interested in disclosing their age, or is it?
In the online survey, there was only one person that didn't disclose their age. So 1 of 73 didn't disclose. All of the others disclosed. And then in my one-on-one engagements, I just used my visual clues. So when I was at the Hammer Inn, or at the Active Living, or at the farmer's market, I wasn't asking people how old they were. I was just using my own visual reference to figure out age demographic.
Okay, I mean, that's fine, but there's less than 60% that audience adds up to us. So I was just curious.
Oh, sorry, I only put the top 3. So there are other responded. There are 40-year-olds responded. There were 50-year-olds responded. So I only put the top 3. My apologies.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. Councillor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. So I kind of, now I think you answered my question, but the Thompson Pallister Bait Company office is actually that building now that's M&M Meats and Sobeys
really,
liquor store?
Correct.
Yeah, really neat story. I saw that on a visit in June. I saw that building and I thought, this is a really neat 1960s commercial building. And what is this? So I photographed it then and thought about it, but I just kind of cued it in the back of my brain and didn't really bring it out. And then in engagement, and I think it was at the farmer's market, a fella comes up to me who really knows Lacombe history. So we're engaged. It must have been a half hour we were chatting. And finally I show him a picture of this building and say, do you know anything about this building? And it happened to be Richard Pallister. And he said, oh yeah, I know quite a bit about this building. It's where the Thompson Pallister offices were. So then he told me what it had been previously, which was Alaskan Camper, which was a company that was building pop-up campers specifically for the Alcan Highway. And they opened a factory in Lacombe in 1960 and then opened that as their showroom. So that was their showroom from 1960 to 1970. And they sold these pop-up campers for the Alaskan Highway out of that office. And then they left in 1970, and about 75, I think it sits vacant for a while, 75, Thompson Pallister Bait Company moves in. So really fascinating story, and it really helps us understand better. There's a big boom that happens in 1960. About that era, there's this boom in population that Lacombe has. So it's interesting to see what's driving it and that there's factories coming in. And then we have this neat little resource that is a vestige of that time period that tells us a bit of that story. So it's just a really neat little piece that we have there. Going by it, you'd never think twice about what the M&M meat shop is, but it's got a neat history.
So yes, the manufacturing facility was just across the parking lot, actually, where the IGA grocery store is.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Not that I remember that, although there was a lot of good things happened in the early 1960s in Lacombe. Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Thank you very much for your report. It just reinforced to me that that's one of the main reasons I moved here. I took one drive off Highway 2 to the older homes and then the downtown core, and that was it. My wife and I were sold. This is where we wanted to be. I did find it rather interesting. I hadn't anticipated this, but when I read your report, this interest in outside natural spaces as historic places. I mean, I guess you could say every outside space has a history going back hundreds of years, I suppose. But I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around that a little bit, where that falls into play. Like, I get it in a way, but I'm just trying to, it's not what I would expect.
Yeah, and to be honest, I wasn't expecting to have that conversation either. But I kept hearing it from the community, and that there is a reverence for these outdoor spaces. Now, the Alberta Historical Resources Act does give municipal councils the ability to designate cultural landscapes. So you can designate a piece of land as a cultural landscape. So if we're able to establish something as a significant piece of land, it can be an MHR that's a landscape. So it deviates a little bit from a historical resource that we're used to, like you just did with the Dinky block, but we can certainly do a landscape. So what we're looking at exploring right now is what would be that area? Would it be the Trans-Canada Trail? Would it be the grounds around the LMC? Would it be a ballpark or a field around associated with a school? Like what would that outside area be? So that's what we're considering now as we're looking that way. But certainly municipal councils have the ability to designate cultural landscapes as municipal historic resources.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just a quick question in regards specifically to the POIL, because that's, I guess, an update of an existing list. If someone has a house that they think should be included in that list, and maybe it wasn't, or maybe it was, but it wasn't really highlighted, for example, who should they approach to sort of discuss what that could look like?
Probably first point of contact would be HRC or HRC's municipal designate. But really a POIL list is open and it's community driven. So we need to hear and know these things. So if a community member wants a site added, you add it, because a place of interest list doesn't really have a criteria around it. If it's interesting to somebody, it goes on the list. And then from there, it can go up to the inventory. So I think first point of contact would be municipal's designate for the HRC, or if you know an HRC member, mention it to them, and then it filters back and gets on the list. But it is it's an adaptable, ever growing, and when we lose resources, decreasing list. So it just kind of fluctuates with time. And as property owners, especially someone comes in and buys a new house and they love that house, boy, they want that thing on POIL right away, right? So we want to get those things on POIL. We want to be sure that we're capturing that value and that interest for sure.
Thank you.
The subject matter is obvious. Thanks for your interest in Lacombe, and we thank you for your time in this presentation.
Oh, I love it. I just want to share. I don't live in Lacombe. My son wishes that we did. So we camped in the summer at Gull Lake, and I would come in during the daytime and do field work. And I brought my 13-year-old with me to teach him the work that I do. So bring a kid to work day with me. So we're walking the streets with the camera, taking pictures, and he is telling me emphatically, we are moving to Lacombe. Dad, we need to be in Lacombe. This place is so cool, so much better than home. Why don't we live in Lacombe? So you have a fan in Oliver Doherty, and I'm sure he will be a Lacombe resident in just a few years. So,
well, we'll see if we can find a realtor and put them in contact with.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Manager Hackett, I see you're making your way up. The next item up on the agenda is item 6.1, the Heritage Survey and Inventory Update. And whenever you're ready with your paperwork there, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Creasy and members of council. I will be very brief tonight because Mr. Doherty has done all the heavy lifting with the presentation. So just wanted to share that the chair of the Heritage Resource Committee is unable to attend tonight, but he did want to pass on his regrets, Miles Chakurdis. So we simply wanted to request, based on the report on tonight's agenda and Mr. Doherty's presentation, that council accept the What We Heard Heritage Survey and Inventory Update Report as presented for information. And this item is the first deliverable in the update work that we're doing. And then in early 2023, HRC and administration would return to council with final recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, you've worked closely with the presenter. Was
Yes.
there any items there that were of significant surprise to you, or ones that stuck out as being especially interesting?
Well, Mr. Doherty referred to the HRC meeting today, and we didn't have quorum, so it was a smaller group, but I think everyone had their favorites, and we haven't quite all agreed on what our favorite additions or favorite for a little bit more research will be. But I think the report is very, Mr. Doherty shared the key highlights out of that. Very interesting to hear how engaged and how proud Lacombians are of their heritage. And just excited to bring forward the recommendations in the new year to kind of streamline the land use bylaw and focus in on the most significant heritage properties.
Great, thank you.
So, thank you.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I move that council accept What We Heard Heritage Survey and Inventory Update Report as presented for information.
Appreciate that. Anyone have any questions or comments before we vote? If not, then you can go ahead and vote. There'll be a lot of green showing up here shortly. And there it is, unanimous. Thanks, everyone. Manager Hackett, while we've got you here, you might as well continue on with item 6.2, the land use bylaw amendments to the R4 district, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor Creasy, members of council. This presentation will be slightly longer than the last one. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight to review with you the R4 Land Use District project findings and report that we've been working on for the last year or so. So the purpose of my presentation tonight is just to update council on the project, describe what we have learned and what we found out so far, and then to recommend next steps, including a future proposed land use bylaw amendment, bylaw 400.42, which would impact the R4 district. In terms of background, just to refresh council on this a little bit, Lacomb's 2020 to 2022 strategic plan established a goal to support positive relationships between neighbors. And strategy under that goal was to review the land use bylaw specifically around redevelopment and possible revisions to the R4 district. So this work has started in June 2021, about a year and a half ago, and then has been progressing over the last 18 months. Just as a bit of an overview of the R4 district for any members of the public watching, what does R4 mean? Well, R4 is a zoning district in our land use bylaw. It's the residential mixed district. And so there is on the screen there a picture of the page out of the bylaw. It's one of 9 residential districts in Lacombe, and it has the widest range of uses. So I don't expect anyone to speed count at this time of night, but there's 27 uses between the permitted uses and the discretionary uses in that district. And that is the most of any of our residential, aside from our residential commercial district. So it's quite a broad district, and it is a popular one for redevelopment in Lacombe as well. Where are these R4 properties located? Well, the map there shows, or the air photo there shows the properties in blue that are zoned R4. And they're concentrated quite heavily in the downtown, but you can see there's also some properties in the north, as well as in the southeast. And so that's fine, what the zoning bylaw says and what R4, where R4 is. But what is a typical building? Or if you were walking or driving through Lacombe, what would you be seeing that's built in R4 properties? Well, starting with the downtown, where a lot of the properties are concentrated, it is quite a variety. But R4 development tends to be infill. For new development, and it's multi-unit infill. So just some photos here of recent projects in Lacombe that have redeveloped or infilled on R4 properties. Just a few photos within the downtown, and you can see that they're multiple unit, just in different configurations or different styles. R4 is also located outside the downtown, though, as I mentioned, to the north and to the southeast. And so these parcels also tend to see multi-unit development, but they tend to be larger because rather than infill, they're new development. And so sometimes we see multiple buildings of multi-unit development, or townhouses would be another common one that we see outside the downtown. So that gives you a sense of what R4 is. What has been the process to review it? The review process has really had 3 parts. The first has been public engagement, which has taken various forms, including a public survey. Then there's been a planning review, or I also refer to that as the technical review, which looked at the R4 district, compared it to other districts, compared it to some other municipalities, and then an administrative review, analyzing and preparing the draft changes that are in the proposed bylaw. In terms of public engagement, used various different tools. Letters went out initially to all the property owners, builders, and developers working in Lacombe on R4 properties. So that was over 700 letters went out. As well as a web page, YouTube videos, which had almost 350 unique visitors in the first 6 months, a survey with 125 responses, and then the survey led to some focus groups of 27 participants who had more to say out of the survey or wanted to talk further about their suggestions and concerns in the R4 area. The key results that came out of the public survey, the most commonly recognized benefits of R4 were seen as allowing for and encouraging affordable housing and housing diversity in Lacombe. Some of the challenges, though, were around density, accommodating that density, parking, traffic and infrastructure pressures. And then the top considerations, or the top things that respondents wanted to to address in future redevelopment in R4 district was preserving neighborhood character, protecting privacy, and ensuring that the scale of development is appropriate for the surrounding area. And so when we started with this project as reducing tensions or being neighborly, these were really the three top considerations of how do we go about that, or what needs to be addressed to achieve that. All of the engagement findings are in Appendix B in the agenda, and I know it's quite a large agenda package, but it certainly has lots of detailed information there. The next step was to do the planning review and take that feedback from the public and look at it with the planning lens of what do our planning documents say, what does the actual district cover, and the results of those reports are in Appendix C. But just to generally highlight kind of the three findings out of those reports. The first is that Lacombe's R4 district is similar in approach to that of other municipalities of having this medium density transition district, so moving from low density to medium density. And that's very similar approach taken in other municipalities. Our R4, it's a tongue twister, does have some areas for improvement. The purpose statement isn't as strong as it could be. The range of uses allowed, and that was a bit of a spoiler alert when I said there's 27 uses there. That is more than any of our comparator municipalities have in their similar district, like quite a few more uses. And then how maximum density is expressed in the district is it's somewhat confusing to people. We're talking about 55 units per hectare. So people think, are 55 units going next to me? Well, no, that parcel is not a hectare in size, but that's hard for the average person or even for a developer who's quickly thinking about it, like, well, how big is the parcel? So that could be clearer. And then addressing these compatibility factors and concerns around infill, such as screening when we're doing R4 development or landscaping. So based on those concerns and based on the information in those reports, bylaw 400.42 has been drafted. It does appear in the agenda package, and it has proposed changes to, I guess, deal with or address those concerns around improving the purpose statement, around using plain language for density. Deleting apartment housing is within that proposed amendment as a higher density use that maybe is not a fit. That is not a fit in our opinion. And then just adding some discretionary opportunity for conditions around compatibility for parking or screening landscaping. So that's the draft bylaw, but what else? So what else did we hear? Certainly there were other issues that were raised during public consultation, and there was issues that were much broader than R4. So some comments around reviewing the parking standards for all residential districts, for example. And then there was also comments that were quite broad in terms of other municipal services beyond planning, so waste removal or taxation. And so to address those, subsequent reports will come forward to council in the future in terms of business plans or strategic plans. And so that information is being shared within the organization. It'll certainly, the planning pieces will come back in future business plans and work that planning and development is doing. So for now, we've focused in on the R4 specific comments, but we haven't, I just want to assure the public, we haven't lost those other comments. They are recorded there. We're getting to the R4 first and then working on those other pieces. So we've been doing this work, but did we get it right? And I guess that's what we would like to hear from affected landowners and the public and developers. It's quite a large agenda package, and so respecting that this is probably the busiest month of the year for a lot of people, we'd like to give them some time to review the documents. And during that time, we would invite any more public input, any questions about what we have proposed. Maybe there's things that folks think are missing. So we would like to hear about that. And then the proposed bylaw can still be reworked. We can still enhance it. It's, I guess it's like this house that's under construction, which is an R4 property in Lacombe this fall. I took the picture. I mean, it's under construction. It's there. You can tell what it is, but it's not finished. And that's the way I would feel about this bylaw amendment, that it's there, you can tell where we're going, but we're still able to make changes. We can still enhance it. It's not complete yet. And then we would propose to come back in February for first reading when it is more finished. And so based on that, the recommendation tonight is that council accepts the review of the R4 Land Use District project findings and report and its appendices for information, and that council direct administration to bring forward bylaw 400.42 amendments to the R4 district for first reading on February 13th, 2023, to allow for an extended opportunity for stakeholders involved in the R4 district consultations to comment on the proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that. So with respect to the stakeholders who got involved, is that the ones that were already involved will be involved in the amendment process, or is this for anyone? How's that going to work?
Yes, Mayor Creasy, certainly for anyone who's been involved in the past, but maybe someone has just moved into R4 or suddenly became interested, we would invite their comments as well. We will be updating based on council's direction tonight. We would be updating the website and making that information available to folks as well, and through many of the same channels that we used the first time.
Wonderful. Thank you. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'm really glad to see this finally come back to council. Definitely my time on MPC, R4 district definitely was, I don't know, the most contentious, I guess we would have, I think, anecdotally, the most applications in regards to that, and a lot of friction around the things I've identified, parking and that. So long time coming, and really appreciate that we're having the chance to finally discuss this. With that said, I would move that council accept the review of the R4 Land Use District project findings and report and its appendices for information.
Councillor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I wanted clarification about how people would respond to this package. Can they just email you, or as you were saying, updating the website? So would that be on the city website?
Yes, thank you. Yes, the city website, we have an R4 web page. And so there is a web address on there that folks can email in. They certainly can email me directly, but might be easier to remember, r4@lacombe.ca. And we will be updating that before the end of the week. But certainly they can even phone the Planning and Development Department too. If they're not connected in on the internet, I'm happy to take a phone call as well.
Councillor Konik?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I think you answered my question, but so people are free to give feedback prior to February 13th already, and obviously you'd be looking for it afterwards as well.
Yes, thank you. And I mean, the sooner the better, because then we have longer to address it, or if there's more research to be done. But yes, certainly anytime before February 13th.
Anything additional before we consider the motion? Very good. Go ahead and vote, please. That is unanimous. I think there was either a expectation or a hope for an additional motion. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. And I would so move that council direct administration to bring forward bylaw 400.42 amendments to the R4 district for first reading on February 13th, 2023, to allow for an extended opportunity for stakeholders involved in the R4 district consultations to comment on the proposed amendment.
Thank you. I don't think there's any additional comments or concerns with that motion either. And please vote. And that is unanimous. We'll look forward to that for first reading in mid-February then. Thank you. The next item up, item 6.3. Director Thompson, you've been waiting patiently for this one with some tax incentive options for council's consideration. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy, and good evening, council. Tonight, administration is seeking council's input on residential development tax incentive concepts. This is before council for two reasons. One, the 2022 to 25 strategic plan includes council's consideration of a tax incentive bylaw before the end of 2024. But also, the developer of Mackenzie Ranch residential subdivision has recently requested that the city establish a tax relief program that would allow residential land developers to defray some tax costs on serviced vacant lots. Council will also recall that in the past, the owners of Caris Village have also requested tax relief. And rather than waiting till 2024, which is the current strategic plan deadline, council may wish to advance consideration of a tax incentive bylaw. And there is an alternative motion in the RFD that would set a committee meeting to discuss the topic further. Many factors that make up a good investment environment, such as interest rates, geography, and market pressures, are out of a municipality's control. The Land Developer Investor Directive, land use bylaw improvements, and a reasonable tolerance for taking risk for reward are some of the ways Lacombe fosters a good investment environment today. Still, cultivating a municipal environment conducive to investment is an important economic development strategy for Lacombe. And a tool not currently used by Lacombe is property tax incentives. Lacombe completed an environmental scan, which does show that some municipal comparators utilize tax incentives and grants as an economic development tool. And tax incentive programs may take various forms depending on the program objectives, the municipality's capacity to administer them, council's tolerance to forego tax revenue, and outcome certainty or uncertainty. The Municipal Government Act allows governments to cancel, reduce, refund, or defer taxes on individual properties or classes of property. Allows the council to phase in a tax increase or decrease, or to use tax incentives by bylaw. However, it is important to highlight the municipality does not have unfettered discretion with regard to property taxes, and so Lacombe needs to consider the legal factors in designing any tax incentive programs. Developers certainly would welcome any opportunity for the municipality to reduce their carrying costs and to incentivize home building. And in doing so, it may be the deciding factor in an investor's decision to proceed with a project. However, incentives also risk giving money away without affecting a developer's investment decision at all. A project that is not viable may not be made viable with the incentive, and a project already viable does not require an incentive in the first place. It is not possible for a municipality to truly know the financial status of a developer's project. And for this reason, tax incentives should reduce the risk of being pure profit for the investor of an already viable project, increase the opportunity of making a marginally unviable project viable, and it should not attempt to overcome the factors and economic headwinds out of a municipality's control to make a project viable. Council's goal could also target improvements to housing affordability for potential homeowners in Lacombe. In that case, special attention will also need to be paid to program design to encourage any cost savings to be passed on to the customer and not just be pure profit for an investor. It appears preliminarily that for a tax incentive program to target its intended development type, it does require a new process with a level of administrative capacity that is not currently available, but could be added with council's endorsement. For example, the city can implement an application-based process whereby administration or council reviews a developer's proposal against certain criteria to determine its eligibility for the incentive. Conversely, a tax incentive program that is simple to implement and administer will be more likely to mean the targeted project type will compete with more non-targeted projects. Tax incentives can result in foregoing significant tax revenue as well, especially during periods of increased development activity. For example, an incentive for developers to create service lots could be tax forgiveness on the municipal portion only for newly subdivided lots for 3 years, and then 100% taxes on years 4 and onwards. This, based on administration's estimate for 30 lots a year, this would result in foregoing $76,000 per year in year 3. An incentive for builders to build homes on already serviced lots could include tax forgiveness on the municipal portion of the improvements component of the tax bill. And for 30 lots as well per year, this would result in foregoing $227,000 of revenue by year 3. So these costs, tax forgiveness costs can be expensive. And for this reason, council may also want to consider mitigating the program costs by incorporating non-tax incentives into its incentive strategy. These could include reducing subdivision fees for developments meeting certain criteria, reduced permit fees for 3 years or a certain period of time after subdividing a lot, providing cash grants to home owners of new homes, or adopting reduced offset levy rates. One thing we're seeing, or we're hearing a little bit more about now, is also the effect of 10-minute response time from our fire department and the effect on development that has, driven by the building code, whereby Lacombe requires increased setback distances on its side yards because of it doesn't meet the threshold required in the Alberta Building Code to allow for narrower setbacks. Other non-tax incentives for new builds for homes, home building directly, could be something like providing Lacombe bucks to use in the community, for example, to furnish the home or purchase appliances, providing utility bill credits to owners of new homes, or providing a cash grant to owners of new homes. And so tonight, council, we wanted to capture some early comments and feedback on tax incentives and to gauge whether the current schedule and work plan deadline to the end of 2024 is sufficient, or if council would like to see that advanced. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Dallas?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I guess mostly this is affecting larger developers, correct? You know, say more than 5 lots at a time is what we're seeing the impact of this largely on?
Not really any impact today, but that is what we would want to gauge from you, is what the objectives of such an incentive program would be. Because if they are lower the barrier to development, then you might want to incentivize the development of new lots, the development of new homes. There's a variety of ways there. If it's to maximize revenue, tax revenue for the municipality, then I would say you want to target that step that converts a serviced lot with nothing on it to a built lot. That's the best step for the municipality because it results in the most significant increase in assessment density, and you get new residents. So it's win-win. If it's to incentivize or to make housing more affordable in Lacombe, that does get more challenging. When we talked about it, one of the difficulties Lacombe has is it is not a price giver in the central Alberta market. It is a price taker. And so the cost of housing largely here is what the market will bear, not necessarily directly linked to input costs. So if suddenly we could cut the cost of housing in half in Lacombe from a development standpoint, I don't think that the price of housing in Lacombe would suddenly be half of what it is in Sylvan Lake or Black Falls or Red Deer. Largely, we're part of a bigger market. So that one directly affecting the affordability of homes gets challenging, and that's where some of the non-tax incentives that Director Thompson talked about, whether it's grants or reduced taxes or utility fees for new home owners, would more directly affect affordability in Lacombe, if that's the goal. And so that's what we really wanted to bring to council's attention. We are receiving some requests for consideration of these type of programs. We're seeing some comparators do have them in place. And so we wanted to say to council, is there an interest? And if so, what would you like such a program to do?
Thank you. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I guess I don't know if I'm going to exactly answer your question, but I do have a couple of thoughts on as far as incentives go. I would be interested to hear strategies on incentivizing potentially redevelopment of existing lots, particularly focused on the downtown area. That would be of something of interest to me. And I also think incentivizing, oh, that's the other thing. I almost lost it for a minute. Sort of higher density. So for developers to be incentivized to sort of embrace that higher density type of product as well. When I say higher density, that could mean anything from duplexes to townhouses to whatever. But I do, for me personally, I think those two things, like I don't feel like, and I'm not sure a blanket approach is necessarily the way to go. I think that maybe more of a strategic focus or boutique kind of type measures would be more appropriate as far as how I see development happening in this community. I think that there are some possibilities for very interesting development going forward. Something that we haven't really seen in a lot of communities, but there's definitely a lot of buzz about is something like the small home type of trend where you see, like it would be a little, maybe a little street or whatever, and it's all those little like tiny homes is the word I'm looking for, I guess. So I think I'd like to see a discussion kind of around that and sort of, I realize that some of these might not fly, but I think it's worth having a discussion. And I think that actually might really engage the community as well in a discussion like this. So I'll just put that out there.
Councillor Dallas.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to follow up, and I appreciate your comments, CAO Gowdy, that this is not just a benefit for developers and making it more affordable for them, that there could be benefits to the community as a whole with these. And so I thank you for that answer.
Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just a couple of comments. First, I'm not surprised to see this other request come in. Once we went down that road with Karis, I mean, it wasn't a tax incentive or a deferral, but I suspect we're going to see more of this going forward. I do like the idea of maybe trying to improve housing affordability. I think that's a nice piece. I would certainly welcome a committee meeting to look at what we can do here. I do believe, though, that I think there's going to be some significant challenges to overcome because, as Director Thompson alluded to, how do you like he says right here, how do you reduce the risk of there being pure profit by someone, or how do you do, I don't know how you do that all, to be quite frank, but I think it certainly doesn't hurt to go down that road to investigate this idea of incentives. The only other comment I had, and I was struck by, it just talks about residential, and I don't know if there's a way we can incentivize just development of industrial lots or commercial development as well. Maybe that's a whole other can of worms. I don't know. But that was just another comment I had when I read this. I'd like to see something for that end of it as well.
So certainly all great comments. I mean, for me, I don't think that venturing into the housing affordability is necessarily a desire of mine. That would be a hopeful outcome. However, with the increased costs of the development of residential subdivisions, I think there is some value in lessening the overall burden for those properties that do not sell for an extended period of time to allow that phase in. I think in order to make these residential developments viable for the developer, they need to do larger tracts of land. They're not doing just a one street kind of approach because of that, just to make them more economical to do. So I don't really necessarily think it's fair to say a tax incentive, as it is perhaps a way of structuring the taxation on the lots as they sell with some sort of a time limit built in. So I'm not totally sure of how that would work. There has to be encouragement for the city not to have this on an ongoing basis for each and every lot. But in saying that, there's no developer out there who's going to go and develop a ridiculous number of lots and take decades and decades to sell them. I mean, that just doesn't make good financial sense on any level. But I think that we're going to run into an issue when here before too awful long when there is a severe limit of lots available to build on. And I don't think that that is in the best interest of our community as a whole, either for the city, prospective buyers, or our tradesmen that are put to work building on them. So I think whether it's a combination of all the other communities that have done things here with our own Lacombe twist on it, somewhere there is a way in there that we can do that to still attract those type of developments without unduly burdening the rest of our taxpayers to foot the bill, just in the delay of implementing the taxes on those lots as they are made use of. But having them available is important, in my opinion. Anyone else? Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I will echo what you're saying. I think in the past, probably 20, 25 years, by not having availability, we missed out on a lot of opportunity. And I agree, I don't want to see our city miss out on them opportunities. I do agree with some other comments too, as Councillor Hibbs alluded to the downtown. I think there's more opportunities there. We also have a lot of industrial lots that have been vacant for over what, 20, 25 years plus since Len Thompson started that. How do we, if them are developed, that's business that's developed, that brings in residents, it's a residual factor if one area is accommodated. So a lot of balancing, and yet our competition is other municipalities have created some incentives too. So yet you want to have the perception that you're open to business in that ways too, but there's a lot of balance, there's a lot of difficult decisions, and I absolutely agree. I'd like to make the motion the council schedule a committee of the whole meeting on March 20th, 2023 to discuss tax incentive goals.
Thank you. Anyone wish to speak on that motion? Then Councillor Dallas.
I'd just like to put forward the motion that council.
Before you do, you've actually got one motion on the floor now.
Oh, sorry.
Not a problem. And if there are no questions with the motion that is on the floor, I will call the question. And I think it's up in your communication devices now. That is unanimous. Are there any other motions for consideration? Councillor Dallas?
Thank you. Just like the motion that council accept a residential land development tax incentives report as information.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? And once that comes up, you're free to vote. And that is unanimous. Thanks, everyone. And I think that takes us to the next page of our agenda, item 6.4, for notice of motion. Councillor Hoekstra, would you care to enter that?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. First of all, my motion is that council direct administration to develop options to improve pedestrian safety at the intersection of 50th Street and Highway 12. May I continue and speak to it?
Thank you. On a notice of motion, the mover is free to speak at this point in time, are they not, C.A. Gowdy?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So this motion came forward as a result of the emails that we all received. In particular, we received one email that led this effort that basically businesses who operate in the downtown see close encounters on a daily occurrence. This past weekend, I don't know which day, I was in businesses downtown, and apparently a young man was hit recently. We had been asked there had been a question presented to council or to city staff a number of months ago about improving or putting a light up on an intersection. And the response that was made was that there hadn't been any instances, according to the police, that involved a pedestrian. So anecdotally now there has been one fairly recently. But more importantly, Theo Gowdy, when I was talking to him about this notice of motion, he said that there's a number of things that we can consider, and public perception of safety or lack thereof is probably a reason that we could be motivated to revisit this intersection and consider some form of alerting the pedestrian or the traffic, or both, to both of them being in the intersection at the same time. So I propose that we do direct administration to look at this more closely. I thought it was very interesting tonight when we hear about our historical buildings too, that number 2 on places that are of really keen interest to our citizens is the downtown collectively. And I think not only do people appreciate the beauty there, they also want to walk there safely. And so I propose this motion that we revisit how we manage pedestrians in our downtown.
Thank you. I believe that item is available to vote on now, so I will call the question. And that is unanimous. Thank you. We do have one in-camera item. However, for our next meetings here, we've got 3 regular council meetings planned for the new year, and all will be at 5:30 p.m. Here in Chambers. They are on January 9th, 23rd, and February 13th. For anybody who chooses to put them in their calendars. And as I said, we do have one item for in camera as well, I believe. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I move that we all move in camera.
Very good. At 6:43 by my clock. And once that comes up to move in camera, and which it has now, please vote. Thanks, everyone. It's unanimous. And that is 6:43 now. I will take a short break and reconvene at